Welcome. It's 2024. Here we are on January 7th. We're taping at 11:30 a.m. on Sunday. Ishmael Mondi in Austin, Texas, and Tony Christ in Falls Church, Virginia. And we are very excited today to bring you our topic to begin the new year. It's about liberty. What better topic could we choose to begin 2024, if not liberty itself? So we're going to get right on into it. We welcome you. We hope many of you in the younger generations eventually are going to start watching this because we feel we're delivering essential information that we don't think many of you have. I want to start by reading something from Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson said, "In question of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." Now, Ishmael, what do you think about that sentence that Thomas Jefferson said? What possibly could he have meant?
Well, and understanding Jefferson as well, and reading his writings throughout history, he very much distrusted government. He distrusted power. He distrusted centralized power in particular. Therefore,
Why was that? Because of the king?
well, he had to deal with a king thousands of miles away who had the ability to impact his life and restrict his freedom and his liberty in particular. This king was able to unilaterally, without any representation from the American colonists, make decisions on our behalf and restrict liberty from London. And
so what you're saying is the Constitution was written to restrict government, to hold it down.
The Constitution was absolute, and you see that in the Bill of Rights as well, where the Bill of Rights doesn't say an individual has the right to. If you read it carefully, it says every one of those amendments starts with the government shall not, or the right shall not be abridged. It does not say, it's one of those where, and I think this is something people don't understand today, where it doesn't grant rights, it restricts the ability of government to interfere with those rights. That is the fundamental nature of the Bill of Rights, the single amendment.
Precisely. All right, well, let's take that and let's move on and let's see in a practical sense what it looks like for an economy. Let's call it a more open system. Open in the sense that it's not the government is restricted and limited. And let's see what it does in the economy. Let's look at two things, and I'm going to postulate that there are only two ways, not three ways, to acquire wealth, to acquire money. Only two. That's it. And the first one is through non-coercive transactions. And the second one is through transfers, which by their nature are coercive. Now, in a world where government is not very big, obviously there's going to be less coercive transfers. Some degree are needed, of course, than there is transactions. But let's look at what a transaction is and what a transfer is, and why it tends to be coercive. A transaction is between two or more people, and it's non-coercive, and it's initiated by them of their own free will. And what's the elemental thing that runs through every transaction that's non-coercive? Both people have to feel that they're better off, or they wouldn't have done it. So if you have a baseball card and it's a player I want, and you want to get $10 and I want to give you $10, you leave with the $10 and I leave with the baseball card, and guess what? We both feel better off, or it would not have happened. And whether it's a transaction with two people or a transaction with multiple people, that rule always holds. So let's look at the arithmetic of it. it's always 1 plus 1 equals 3. Now you say, why does it equal 3? Well, everybody knows 1 plus 1 equals 2. Not true. Because of the feeling of the positive feeling that's created, the utility that's created from the action causes it to be greater. And that's a utility gain for society because we both feel like we won. Now let's look at a transfer. A transfer is you pick up let's call it money. You pick up a pound of money and you move it from A to B. Now, what are the characteristics of that? Does it happen in nature? Would it happen on its own? Well, of course not. So let's assume, how does it happen? What are the sort of obvious situations that a transfer happens? Well, if a guy goes in with a Saturday night special at a 7-Eleven and sticks it in the cashier's face and says, "Give me the money," well, I would call that a transfer. It's not a transaction. There's no choice. The gun is forcing the person to give them the money. One person is clearly left better off, the other is not. Now, let's take it a little further. If a policeman goes to arrest somebody for breaking into a store, that's a coercive encounter. There's not a choice. That person is being arrested. That's a transfer. Anything that was taken in a criminal sense is a transfer. Any action that was taken by police involves a transfer. Now, how about a judge? Well, that's not a transaction. When the judge's gavel comes down, you're guilty or innocent. Somebody didn't like that decision, okay? And somebody did. The point is, it did not occur where both parties were at arm's length and of their own choice. So that's another transfer if there's a monetary value to a court decision. How about legislation? Legislation, luckily, is conducted by people we elect. So we indirectly control who is conducting legislation. But when a legislative bill is passed in our republic, that's certainly not a transaction. It's an order. It's a law. If you don't obey it, you have a consequence. And usually there's a pecuniary penalty to not obeying laws. A regulation. Now, regulations are much discussed because much of what we're being affected by today is done by unelected officials, regulators, and there are very many regulators. But regulations, too, are not a transaction. They are a transfer. Now we know, as Jefferson said, we need a government and we need certain restrictions and there have to be certain laws. But if it gets to be too much, how do they intermix? How do the two intermix, the transactions and the transfers? Well, obviously, if your social system is more closed, it's more reliant on transfers than transactions. So now, what is the arithmetic? We said the arithmetic to a transaction was 1 point plus 1 equals 3 because people feel better off. Now, how about a transfer? What is the math? Okay, ready for this one? Here's the arithmetic. 1 minus 1 equals -1, not 0, -1. Why is that? Because they don't occur in nature, and you have to pay someone, you have to pay vigorish or pay a charge to either a policeman, a criminal, a judge, a legislator to put them into effect. So that's where the -1 comes in. So let me ask you now, we don't have to be math whizzes for this. How do you grow an economy? How do you expand wealth and consequently welfare in a material sense? How do you grow an economy? Through transactions or transfers? Ishmael?
It's always been transactions. I mean, it's
That's it.
and
Now,
not only that, I would say to your point, transactions that are non-coercive. I'll give you one example of what I consider a coercive transaction, and that is rent control, meaning a landlord, while technically a transaction, is unable to adjust rent because a regulator or legislation or whatever says you can only adjust rent by X amount, or in some cases you cannot. To me, while there's a transaction, technically, there is significant coercion in something involving rent control.
yeah, no doubt there is, and no doubt that's just one example. The point that I'd like our viewers to understand is that as transfers increase, as a social system becomes more and more reliant on economic transfers, transactions decline. So there comes a point where the society doesn't have a net gain because transactions are being restricted. And there's a dozen reasons aside from rent control. There are all kinds of limits. Taxation is a transfer. We need taxes. We couldn't have a government. Now let's move on and let's see what Thomas Jefferson and the framers said government should be. Because today I don't know if anyone understands this. And this is right out of the Constitution. And I'm going to read it. They said government should have 5 departments, 5 agencies only. That was in the U.S. Constitution. And what are they? Well, they're right in the Constitution: defense, state, justice, treasury, and a combination of departments that became interstate commerce. That's it, 5. And they said, have 5 and do a good job. Well, today we have 2,000 and we're doing a terrible job. Our government today has, and I picked the number 2,000. I haven't counted them. You'd lose your mind if you did. We not only have agencies, we have entities like civil defense that were formed in the 1950s. We have no way to even get rid of what has been formed in the past. It just stays there and keeps going. So we have 200 years of things that have been every legislative group passes legislation, and we have more and more of them. Then you heap regulations on. So we are totally off the reservation in the context of what the founding fathers imagined how we should govern. They wanted all the rest, all the other decisions to be left to the states and the individual. As Ishmael said, the Bill of Rights testifies to the fact that the constraints that Thomas Jefferson talked about were to be on government, not on the people, to protect the people and protect their rights, because people were sacred. People were important for once in history. And that was the background that the founders wrote the Constitution and Declaration of Independence under, and Bill of Rights and the amendments to the Bill of Rights. And that was the background. And where are we today? If you consider transactions and transfers, if you consider, we're not, if you look around the world, we have a very strong economy still, and we create a lot of welfare compared to anyone else in the world. And I'm speaking mainly of our recent competitor, China. If you want to quantify China's whole stock market, okay, and I'm not minimizing them. I think they are a very serious and very real threat to these liberties that we've talked about. But if you want to quantify their whole market, the marginal product of their whole market, all their public companies together, is somewhere around $200 billion. And if you look at our markets, our public markets, the value of our public markets is near $56 trillion, and the marginal product is over $4 trillion. Now, why do I say that? Well, because you've got a government is going to get tax dollars. And what better way to show you the disparity in the number one and number two economies in the world? And you can go to Europe, and you can go to all these nations that recently Biden's trying to glue together to protect the Red Sea recently, and you can add up the marginal product of all their markets together, and they're not a fraction of ours. So it's up to us. It's not, even though it's tempting to push off responsibility on others. If there's an action that needs to be taken or something, it's largely on us. It's on no one else in the world. Maybe tragically, but that's the reality of it. So liberty is something in an economic sense that we can quantify by our arithmetic, and we can say where there are free transactions, where people are allowed the dignity to make their decisions, be it a baseball card or trading an automobile, whatever, and they do it themselves. Both people or all the parties involved have one thing in common: they leave feeling better off, as long as it's non-coercive. But when coercion steps in, and it does, and we need a level of coercion. We definitely need some coercion to protect us. And the founding fathers said we should only be regulated and controlled by government in 5 areas. Again, defense, state, justice, that's the police inside the country, treasury, that's our treasury, and commerce. 5 areas. That's it. They didn't talk about medical coverage, let alone medical coverage for illegals coming across the border. They didn't talk about providing housing. They didn't talk about all these things. Okay, for a reason, because they left it to people. They left it to people. And that's what gave us the liberty to lead our lives freely. And when you look around the world, you can really contrast that level of openness. You see it in the disparity today of all the newscasts. Well, everybody's got a different opinion, and they're all going to come out with different ideas and different opinions. Well, you can go to the mullahs in Iran and see what happens to anyone that has a different opinion. They don't stay around very long. They're gone. They disappear at midnight. You never hear of them again. And you can go to many closed systems, China. You can go to Putin's Russia. Oh, another guy fell out of a 15-story building who happened to say something, and on and on and on. So those closed economic systems are at a huge disadvantage to us because they have prohibited transactions, which is the bread and butter of our growth and our development as individuals. Our hope, our opportunities are in our transactions. So liberty has a manifestation in America. It's not a state of mind. They're actual non-coercive things that it can be viewed as. Now, I want to recommend you all, because the paper I wrote, actually the subject today, I'd written it quite a few years ago, about 15 years ago, and almost exactly. And there are very many other points in the paper. I want to close with a couple of comments right out of the paper I wrote, but I want to recommend to you to go to odysseyinvestments.info and press consensus. The paper will be on file under consensus. I want to say too, we're going to get back to some other topics, and I know we gave a pretty dire picture of the markets coming up, and so far they've lived up to it in the first week of January. We're going to talk about that some more in the future. But on liberty, to begin 2024, there can't be anything more important than liberty and freedom. And I want to end with some comments by Jefferson, and I also want to quote another gentleman. So we're gonna quote Alexander Taylor, a Scottish history professor, who in 1787 stated some facts that were actually a repeat of things that Cicero had said 60 BC, and also Ben Franklin the same year mentioned. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. Now, that's a closed system, something we have not had to suffer under yet, and hopefully never will. And Taylor goes on to say, through the following sequence, Taylor lists 7 things as a sequence that takes a democratic system into a system of a dictatorship. He starts by saying, from bondage to spiritual faith. Number 2, from spiritual faith to great courage. Number 3, from courage to liberty, which is where we are. From liberty to abundance. We're certainly at that stage. From abundance to complacency. From apathy to dependence, and from dependence back into bondage. Now, I thought that was pretty profound. I ended the paper with it 15 years ago, and I would say we're right at abundance into complacency, which is step 5 on his list. As I said, Ben Franklin talked about this at the same time, and also Cicero, 60 BC. But we have to be very cautious at this stage, not to underestimate these threats. And on that note, we're still in an open society. We're still in a society that allows us to conduct our podcast and allows us to bring you this information. I encourage you all to look on the website. We look forward to seeing you next week. We plan to go live at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fridays. So we're going to start to go live 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fridays. Now, I want Ishmael, do you have any closing comments to make? We're going to let the people go to our next.
None for today. Just have a wonderful first full week of the year. We look forward to you joining us. Email us, and this is going to be very exciting what we have coming up next.
Have a blessed week, and from from Sunshine and Transparency, that's what we call our show. Sunshine and Transparency. We wish you all a blessed week. Thank you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next week.